Going to school is one of those taken for granted experiences. We attend, we learn, we demonstrate our learning. Ask most people what it takes to be a successful student, and you're going to hear things like motivation, self-determination, self-regulation. But I'd like to tell you a little bit more about some of the students I've met. Connor was a 7-year-old boy who became violent in the classroom. The teacher evacuated the rest of the students out of the room because he was a threat to their safety. Laura was a woman who started her GED certificate program, a form of high school equivalency, if you will. She started it 7 times, and she'd stopped 6 times. And the school administration was waiting for her to quit again. They were shaking their heads at her lack of motivation. In my role as a researcher, a teacher, a psychologist, I examine worldviews, viewpoints that form our perceptions because these influence what we do. I ask a lot of questions, and I try very hard to ask the ones that matter because we only answer the questions we ask. I try to shine the light. I try to listen people into voice. When we talk about quality education, we often fail to acknowledge that we as a society, as a community, as a system, don't provide children and families with the equitable access to the essential building blocks of school success. The UN Sustainable Development Goal that we're talking about tonight is to ensure that all girls and boys complete free primary and secondary education by 2030. It also aims to provide equal access to affordable vocational training to eliminate gender and wealth disparities with the aim of achieving universal access to a quality higher education. Amartya Sen, the economist and philosopher, says that the essential component to achieving something is the freedom to do it, and that freedom includes both the opportunity and being free to make a choice. If we don't provide equitable access to education, we can't call it quality education. We say that we're committed to education for all, but we have a system that favors some and leaves others behind. Because success in school is related to intelligence, well-being, health, support, and the single biggest predictor of all of those things is wealth. Failure in school is often connected to family disruption, poor health, homelessness, not being safe. Again, all connected to wealth, or in that case, poverty. And gender matters. The biggest predictor of income, earned income, is education, particularly for women. It's like a never-ending loop. Wealth disparity not only continues, it grows. And if ever we had a powerful lesson in how wealth protects the wealthy in times of crisis, we have it during this pandemic. If we hope to close the gap between genders and between people, we need to start with education. So here's my first call to action. Let's all use our voices. The voices that are sometimes loudest in politics, economics, and systems are privileged. Some advocate for equity, some for capitalism, some for inclusion, some for exclusion. So let's all speak up. Let's listen each other into voice. Acknowledge, support, amplify. Right now, 1 in 10 women don't feel safe self-quarantining in their homes because of intimate partner violence. Most have children, and most of the essential work being done right now, like the cleaning and the caring, is done by women, who make 13% less money than men. Women had the vast majority of single-parent households and are often judged harshly when their children don't do well in school. This is my second call to action. Don't blame mothers, your own or somebody else's. Be non-judgmental. Seek to understand, to look deeply. Be responsive to the needs of others. We blame Connor for tearing up the classroom and Laura for quitting, but we must share the responsibility for their failures just as we share the celebrations for students who succeed. Connor and his mother were doing the best they could. Laura wanted nothing more than to keep her children safe and to finish school, but no one succeeds or fails on their own. Women and families need education systems that are responsive to their needs, but the challenge is, or at least one of the challenges is, that these systems operate and renew themselves in the image of those who created them in the first place. This makes both silent and invisible those who don't have privilege, who may be living with interpersonal and structural violence, experiences that might include child maltreatment, intimate partner violence, racism, historical trauma, poverty, all forms of oppression. When we talk about who is the most at risk for being excluded from the taken for granted experiences like education, a good job, a home, good health, we have to think about intersectionality. When we think of an intersection, I don't want you to think of two streets coming together, but a destination where everyone arrives differently. On foot, in a car, alone, in a group, afraid or brave, faster or slower, being able to speak the language or unable to understand. Intersectionality is more about more than being poor and not having much education. It's growing up without access to the benefits of education, like a relationship with a caring teacher. It's growing up hungry and homeless, not finishing school, and then relying on short-term and dangerous work. It's all these things and being told you're not enough, that you don't work hard enough, that you're not caring enough. It's not an additive model, but it's a multiplicative one. And it makes life exponentially harder. We talk a lot about resilience when we see people struggle, but resilience isn't an individual trait, right? It's shared. Children don't become resilient on their own, just like they don't become poor or homeless on their own. They need support to thrive. And resilient families and communities have what they need to withstand stress, promote health and well-being, and hope for the future. And they share that resilience with the children. So here's the next call to action. Do what you can to be a part of a family or a community that's building resilience. Advocate, respect, include. Notice and look toward, not away from need. Ask people what they need and then offer the help they ask for. During the current quarantine, that might be access to your Wi-Fi or getting out that old laptop in your closet so that kids can take part in the online school activities. It might just be a note of encouragement to your neighbors saying, I notice you and I hope you guys are well. I learned many lessons from the Women of the Bridges project, a classroom we had for women who didn't have their high school diploma and who had experienced a lifetime of violence. The traditional adult education system would deregister them if they missed more than 20% of their classes. So most of the women had been deregistered many times because violence, poverty, poor health, getting restraining orders all require appointments, daytime appointments. So we tried something. We did some things to respond to their needs. And do you know what happens if you remove the attendance barrier? They come to school. They keep coming as much as they can. Laura came, and when she needed to take time away, she did. She was welcomed back when she returned, and she finished. Not her GED, but her Ontario Secondary School diploma. Then she got a job. Then she got custody of her children again. Quality education responds to the needs of the learners and builds opportunities for inclusion and success. Trauma and violence-informed care is an approach that doesn't require anyone to tell their stories, because often our stories are the only thing we have that belong to us. And too often, our stories are commodified. Too often, our system requires people to trade their stories of hurt, of not enough, of danger, for food, for care, for being safe. Instead of wanting to know a person's story, let's focus on how to make things safe for all, to share opportunities, to foster relationships, collaboration, and choice. Trauma and violence-informed care in the classroom means we don't ask students, what's wrong with you? But we ask ourselves, what's happened? What might still be happening to you? It's recognizing that the brain, in order to be ready to learn, needs to feel safe. Imagine being isolated from others and treated like a threat when you're 7, or being told you're not motivated enough to go to school. Students arrive at school living with contexts over which they have little control or no control. Yet we're part of an education system that, despite reform after reform, still places the bulk of the responsibility for success on the most vulnerable person in the room. System leaders and governments write curriculum. They decide what's going to be taught and, more importantly, what's not going to be taught. When they make decisions about pedagogy, they must address who's included and who's left out, who languishes and who flourishes. If we want to reach our goal, we must hear all voices, including those who need safety, equity, and inclusion to be welcome to learn. And we need to do it now. And you can help make this happen. When you go to the meetings at your children's schools, ask about who's not there. If you're approached to donate to a fundraiser for a new school playground, please donate. But also write a letter to the school board, to the Ministry of Education, to ask why the school has to beg for dollars to fund a safe play space for the children. Shine the light on exclusion. Help and use your voice. Because if we're going to provide free and high quality education to all children by the end of this decade, we must recognize and take responsibility for the conditions that right now are making it so difficult for them to belong and to succeed. So let's talk about Connor, the boy who was tearing up the classroom. You know, these were good people at his school. And let me say that schools are filled with good people. But these good people didn't know the students or the community because there had been so much turnover among staff and administration that Connor lost his relationship with his teacher, the person in whom he could confide. So that morning, his mom had made him go to school even though he didn't want to. He was a smart kid who knew that you got suspended if you did something really bad. So he did the best he could. He wanted to get sent home because, you see, his mom's abuser, who is convicted of aggravated assault after he attacked her, was being released from jail that day. He threatened that when he got out, he was going to come back and finish what he started. Connor just wanted to go home and protect his mom. Laura just wanted to get her kids back. It's all about relationships. It's where we can all find safety and grow if we have the opportunity. And I have a lot of hope that we're making schools a safer place to be so that all students will have access to quality education. My research team has worked with teachers to create a website that provides free access to tools that will help them care for their students and their own well-being. And for the last 4 years, I've had the opportunity to teach the only mandatory course in Canada about mental health and trauma and violence informed care to student teachers. And we now have over 1,200 new teachers who have been introduced to students like Connor and Laura and others who haven't been afforded the essential freedoms and choices to experience educational success. We don't talk about diagnosis. We talk about context, about poverty, racism, homophobia, historical and generational trauma, and what these experiences look like in a classroom and how they can affect learning. And then we talk about what we can do to include everyone in learning. So here's my final call to action. If you're a student who needs support, reach out slowly. Find your people in ways that are safe. If you're a parent, ask your child's school how they're making your school a safe place and an inclusive place for all. Teachers, reach out to your peers and to the resources that are there and take care of yourself. We need you to be well. And system and community leaders, please use your voice. Make safety and inclusion priorities and remember that in quality education, students learn from and teach one another. And that is our best hope for the future. Thanks so much for this opportunity.